Good afternoon and welcome to the final session of Pensions Awareness Week.ie for 2021. My name is Rafe Benson. I'm one of the founders of MoneyCube.ie, the investments and pensions business. And I'm joined today by Brian Dunphy of the Life Assurance Association, LIA, to talk about leaving your job in a defined benefit pension situation. So welcome, Brian. Good to have you with us today.
Thanks, Main Rafe.
I guess, when it comes to defined benefit pensions, the reputation they have, or what we're all told, is that these things are like gold dust now, impossible to get your hands on. And if you have the good fortune to have had a couple of years in a DB scheme, that you should stick to it like glue, never give it up, and kind of treat it as rock solid. But I guess what we're going to talk about is whether that's always the case and when to question that received wisdom. But maybe, I suppose the reason we were interested to have this session was you've recently been through a process of leaving a job with a DB scheme. So in addition to your kind of expertise with LIA, you've kind of got direct personal experience of that. So maybe just start by telling us what that feels like and when the DB pension crops up in that whole process of leaving a job, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. So look, I'll personally share, I spent 19 years with Ulster Bank and left last year. Yeah, I'm 1 year gone from Ulster Bank. And I am now obviously part of LIA and delighted to be on board with the education side of the financial planning and financial advice and the industry. Where this discussion comes up with regards to defined benefit, I'll be quite honest, obviously a decision to leave your employer after such an amount of time is not something you take lightly. And then you're factoring in the employment market. Your biggest concern is your ability to earn and, where's your next move? Where's your career going? So your actual attention to detail in relation to your retirement plan that you have built up for 19 years mightn't be very much to the forefront of the agenda. And in fact, it probably comes back into play towards the end line when you're actually leaving. And the harsh reality of it is, as soon as you leave, within 2 weeks of leaving your employer, you get communication from the administrators of the pension scheme saying, what would you like to do? Here's your choices. And it suddenly becomes something that you're trying to adjust to life after working or I won't say institutionalized, but working for an employer for a long time and looking at your next move and where your career is going, to suddenly have to think about, actually, I now need to think about when my career ends and the benefit of what I've built up already. And what exactly does this mean for me? It does come into play if you're being offered a redundancy, because there is a key decision made when you're taking your redundancy package with regards to the tax-free element of it. One question you would be asked is, do you want to retain your tax-free entitlement for your pension in the future versus taking a higher tax-free lump sum now and waiving that right? My advice to anybody would be at that point to start engaging with somebody who might have the information or the knowledge to be able to help you make that decision, and also know your options with regards to making option A or choosing option A versus B, as there are, from what I've learned, there are significant options and various different thought process that you need to think about as to, if you know where your next move is in your career, one option might be more influential for you to go with than the other.
Yeah, it's a tempting one, isn't it? In that redundancy situation, potentially you're unsure what your next move is, and somebody's offering you pound notes today, sort of thing, versus a notional tax-free benefit in some years' time. We always find that more difficult to visualize future money rather than value today, I feel like.
And that's a massive one, because when you're looking at value now today, there's a very black and white way of calculating a value of a defined benefit pension. And, the Pensions Authority give guidance on how to calculate the transfer value. That's the black and white transfer value basis. But there's also then an economic value. And that's really projecting forward what your future value is and, comparing it to what is it in value in today's market terms. And that's a very interesting calculation or discussion to have with somebody like a certified financial planner who can work this out with you.
Yeah.
And they'll talk about various different technical terms when you're looking at quantifying these values. And if you were to take a transfer value, people will mention a thing called a hurdle rate. And effectively what it is your ability to earn the projected return from you taking the value now to what that would provide as a benefit if you've left it in defined benefit scheme. And
Hmm.
you're quantifying exactly the rate of return that you need by investing your own fund
Mm.
as opposed to leaving it there. And again, the guidance of somebody who has a little bit more knowledge. And in particular, I was fortunate enough because I've touched on it. I'm a certified financial planner. I should know this. However, I wouldn't make this decision myself without actually second guessing and actually getting another colleague to or another professional to look at this with their set of eyes,
Yeah.
because you're the one who's emotionally attached to this.
Yeah.
And I am emotionally attached. It's my retirement fund. So I don't want to make the wrong decision. I want to get the best advice possible. So another key message would be a quick decision mightn't necessarily be the right decision. You can take your time. There's no urgency to start transferring a pension fund immediately.
Yeah.
Or you can take your time to think about what is the best option for you.
Yeah, and I think like in a lot of the ways, like the UK is a little bit ahead of this, probably because they have had some bad experiences with, say, some of those steel plants in Wales.
Mm,
There have been scammers transferring people out of defined benefit schemes and whatnot, But like certainly there, the kind of well, two things really that I noticed compared to here in Ireland is. Firstly, there's a requirement to get advice if you're looking at a scheme that's worth more than 30,000. And secondly, the kind of it's almost like the default position is that you should not transfer out of a defined benefit scheme, and you're
yeah.
kind of critiquing that and trying to find a reason. Well, is there a reason, be that financial or could be around risk and so on, that mean you should transfer out, but the starting point is actually no. Hang on, this is defined benefit. It's back to that gold dust sort of point.
Yeah, you've touched on it. You're bang on, because the minute somebody says to you, you're transferring a defined benefit scheme, are you mad? You can't get, you couldn't get that for love nor money. Well, actually, it's not just the financial. You need to think about the other questions that could go on in the background, such as, and this is a crazy one, but do I actually want to still ever engage in the future with my previous employer for
Yeah,
my retirement? Do I just want a clean break? Do I want that move? That is another factor and a decision that somebody would like to make. You'd also like to then look at this. A defined benefit is effectively a promise. It's a
hmm,
promise that somebody's going to pay you a pension in the future of X amount. You might, in the back of your mind, ask yourself, well, how strong is that promise? And in particular, if the employer that you are with mightn't be around in the future, how strong is that promise going to be, and how easy accessible will your employer be for any questions you have? And
yeah,
and
and
they're the things that would go on in the back of your mind for anybody leaving
yeah.
employment and a scheme.
It's like that's something that's cropped up during the week actually as well. I know in the session we had around technology pensions, Geraldine Magner was saying the same. We've got some sort of bad experiences with pensions, kind of that we need to unlearn. And I know they were talking about the Waterford Crystal kind of notorious situation. So yeah, certainly the financial strength and the strength of that promise is definitely a big part of it. It doesn't matter what kind of big numbers are being dangled if when that promise is called on, it's not good.
Yeah.
So that's got to be right.
And then the other thing that could be opportunistic is the timing might be right. The person who is providing you with this promise, they may also be giving you an incentive to say, look, that is the transfer value X, but we'll increase it. Is there an enhanced transfer value on offer, based on their own plans? And they may be opting to give somebody an enhanced transfer value now, factoring in a number of decisions that are going to be made in the near future. And it could be the right time to actually realistically look at this offer and to think about it. But it is something that, going back to your point about you've suddenly just left a job after, quite a significant amount of time, that needs adjustment. And then thinking about your future, because the likelihood is you probably have less years to work in your next career than
Mm.
you have in the job you've just left to retirement. And I know in my case that is fact, I know I don't look it, but I'm well into my 40s. But
Did I miss an opportunity to flatter
yeah,
you
you did.
there?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I was
An
just
opportunity
about
to
to.
say no, Brian. Your hair is grey, but yeah, no. The reality is, your next time frame in employment is going to be shorter than the
Yeah.
previous one, and you now have the end line with regards to retirement coming closer to you than it was 19 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an important decision that you should take your time to look at, but
Yeah, and I
don't be
think
afraid of it.
one of the things that we find customers don't kind of, it's a strange thing to get your head around, but like you can receive an enhanced transfer value, which is almost in the realm of like, you know, we get customers who've maybe done a couple of years in a company and yet managed to land in their defined benefit scheme, and yet they're being promised what looks like a very large amount. But of course, what we don't see necessarily when we get that letter is why the employer is motivated to get a former employee out of that pension scheme.
Yeah.
And there can be all sorts of accounting reasons that mean that that makes sense and looks good on their balance sheet, and that's good for you as the person leaving the scheme. So yeah, sometimes the maths just works in your favor.
Yeah, and another decision factor could be, you touched on the balance sheet. Some people like the idea of getting that pension onto my balance sheet as opposed to theirs. And while it's part of the employer's pension scheme, it's on their balance sheet. Me taking control of it, it's on my balance sheet. And at the end of the day, an enhanced transfer value is offered, I'm sure, because the promise that's been made is dependent on the funding levels that are going to continue into that pension fund. Well, if an employer is no longer going to be in the market, there won't be any more funding unless their parent group are going to fund it to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that the promises are maintained. So, there are less people contributing to it going forward. Therefore, they're making accounting decisions to offer enhanced transfer values. But, ultimately, taking ownership of it is also another decision factor, that a lot of people like the idea of not being bound by the scheme rules and transferring it into my own balance sheet as such. I have more power with regards to my destiny and my retirement plan, because it mightn't necessarily just be this retirement plan, but you can then marry it with your current earning potential and your other plans with regards to retirement.
Yeah,
Which
and like what an absolutely core message for Pensions Awareness Week as a whole, right? So it's not about giving anyone the right or wrong answer in their situation. That's going to be different for everybody. But the one common theme we can all do is take control of our pensions, and that might result in a decision to stay exactly where you are, particularly for DB schemes. In a lot of cases, that will be the right answer. But yeah, so certainly
yeah.
doing that and taking that decision deliberately as opposed to just letting it flow past is a core thing that we advocate as part of the week.
And amazingly, the last 2 years of the pandemic has given people a new perspective with regards to how things can change so quickly overnight, and in particular health. And anyone who has touched what, it's not good news but we have come out the other side of it. But anyone who has been impacted by COVID, they can see how their health can change overnight, and having the power to decide the destiny of your own retirement plan actually gives you a little bit more comfort. Because being bound by the rules of a scheme, your set retirement age is fixed in stone. Accessing that fund is at a particular age. Taking a little bit more ownership of it gives you more choices, and really opens up more opportunities for you.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
if we boil it back then, Brian, like I guess I mean the decision at its heart when you leave a business and you've got a DB scheme is quite simple. Now there might be complications to it. You might have an associated defined contribution scheme as well, and that's probably a separate decision point, or you might have to transfer them both out together or whatnot. But if we just sort of focus on the defined benefit element first, like I suppose the decision is really, do I stay or do I go? I mean, it's not much more complicated as a
no,
question. It's
yeah.
hard to answer, but it's easy to ask. But what do you think the decision factors are then in answering that question?
So, for me personally, I'd be looking at my retirement age.
Hmm.
Right. So my plan to access this retirement fund, it's set in stone with regards to the defined benefit scheme states. That's the age I know I'm going to access this pension. The tax-free element lump sum that I'll be entitled to in the future. Um, it's amazing that when you look at the comparison of what you know will be fixed and paid to you from a defined benefit scheme versus if I were to transfer, are there alternatives, and will I get the same or a different tax-free lump sum, even if, as I touched on in my ex gratia payment or my term, my redundancy payment, that I took an enhanced payment to waive my right of a future tax-free lump sum. Is that actually the case? And that's where the advice of a professional will be able to give you very good information in relation to, well, what are the options going forward if you have waived that future tax-free lump sum entitlement. At least you know you're getting your pension fixed amount at a certain age, but are there alternatives? And then the other big factor that you will be looking at is you want the security of knowing that, I kind of, I'll dumb this down, but I like the idea that if I have money in a bank, I can go to the bank, right? I know where it is. Where's my pension? When it comes to my employer or my previous employer, well, what if they're not that accessible? And how do I really find out, is the promise as strong as it always was? And not that I'm doubting it. I trust. I've worked for an institution for 19 years, fantastic relationship, and still do to this day. And that promise is as strong as it ever was. But they're the thoughts that go through my head with regards to, okay, do I want to consider taking ownership of it? And
yeah, that's just on a practical point, that's right, isn't it? I mean, it's just a fact for all pension schemes that once you've left the organization, it's not HR's job to answer your calls. There will be a pension administrator to be found somewhere,
yeah,
but it's probably a central mailbox with a 2 week turnaround time, whatnot. Like, so it's at best a painful process for people, and at worst they get forgotten about and have no leverage to hammer the table, if you like, and get attention. So yeah, I would say that's a
that's it.
strong reason.
And if I dumb it right back down, it's going to be a much bigger bank account than I'll ever have in the bank. It's
Yeah,
going to be a much more significant balance in this,
yeah,
and yet it's harder for me to potentially get in the door of the bank, and
yeah,
that's the key, or speak to the person who I need to get the information from. So that's where the one of the massive decisions for me that might influence it is, okay, it's me who owns it then, or it's somebody else who's running it, and that's still to be made. And as I said, one of the things is time is not an urgency here. As I said, I've left a year ago, and I still haven't made that decision with regards to my retirement fund. But
yeah,
it's on the horizon. It's there now for me. I've settled down with regards to I took the first steps with regards to what am I going to do? What am I working at now? I did what I need to do as regards my education, my qualifications, and I know what I want to do my career. And now you have the time and the mindset with regards to thinking about these decisions, as opposed to when you just leave a job, it's possibly not the right time. It's like any financial decision, you have to think about the vulnerability of somebody
yeah,
who has worked for 20 years or whatever with an institution. It's possibly not the right time to make this decision at the moment. So you give yourself time, and they have a duty of care to make sure that you are making the right decision. However, you have also got the opportunity to speak to people and seek guidance from experts in the industry. Anybody, and what I'm talking about here are the recognizable qualifications, even from ourselves with LIA, the QFA, RPA, or the CFP designation, like a certified financial planner like myself. Meet with somebody who has the level of knowledge, but also the experience. And like yourselves in MoneyCube, you'll be looking after my interests through your set of eyes as well. And that's what you need. You need second set of eyes, a second opinion,
yeah.
somebody to give you guidance here.
Well, it's a bit like that. As you say, time gives us perspective, but also, I suppose, getting a second opinion does too. So
Yeah.
I'll maybe kind of sum up what I've heard there, Brian, really, because we're about time up. But I suppose what I'm hearing there is, there's money to be won and lost by taking this decision in a way that's kind of rigorous, not missing opportunities and leaving money on the table there, and figuring out what your best interest is. But it's not a pure money decision. There's also an element of kind of taking control of it, particularly if you've maybe left in slightly unpleasant terms or redundancy situation and so on. That's a big part of it. And I suppose thirdly, definitely take your time on this stuff.
Yeah.
The letter arrives on the mat while everything's still pretty raw, and actually, it's usually a sign of something funny going on if you are being pressed into making a financial decision urgently. So, that's kind of good advice in any situation, I guess.
Yeah.
But so maybe we'll leave it there. But I think that's been really helpful, Brian, to give our viewers a sense of how to deal with that situation. And there's definitely thank you for joining today. There's lots more information on the Pensions Awareness Week.ie website, and log on, and you can certainly contact us if you'd like to discuss it more. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Right.